As the stories unfolded, it became clear that this case was not merely about one person. It was a reflection of broader themes of inequality, fear, and the quest for understanding. It claimed the essence of my belief in justice. It was not just about the culmination of a trial. It was about the honor of every individual who sought to find truth and healing through the legal process. Their words, ostensibly focused on facts and evidence, carried an insinuation that Marcus Reed was emblematic of a broader societal failing, a failure exacerbated by the very color of his skin. I raised my eyebrow discreetly each time I detected a subtle undercutting of my mandate. As the trial progressed, I found myself increasingly drawn into the complexities that lay beneath the surface of this case. The defense, though faced with a formidable array of accusations, seemed poised to counter the narrative being thrust upon the jury. They meticulously dissected each piece of evidence, revealing inconsistencies in the prosecution's timeline and shedding light on Marcus's character. A diligent young man with aspirations that transcended the stereotypes the opposition sought to exploit. As the days turned into a week, the courtroom atmosphere evolved. I observed the jury's reactions, noting furrowed brows during particularly charged testimonies, as well as subtle shifts in their posture at pivotal moments in the arguments. They leaned forward when the defense introduced witnesses who painted a tapestry of Marcus's life, illustrating how he navigated challenges with resilience and integrity. The stark contrast between this personal narrative and the sensationalized portrayal offered by the prosecution was unmistakable. Then came a breakthrough. A witness who had been present during the incident in question took the stand. They described the chaos of that fateful night, their voice steady yet tinged with emotion. As they recalled the events, it became evident to me that what had transpired was far more complex than the binary lens of guilt or innocence suggested. All eyes were glued to the witness as they recounted the sequence of events, carefully clarifying crucial details that had been overlooked. For a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope that truth might yet prevail, that the jurors would see beyond the layers of bias that had clouded the narrative thus far. As I took notes, I couldn't help but reflect on the implications of this case beyond the courtroom. It was a microcosm of broader societal issues, race, justice, and the media's role in shaping public perception. I wondered how Marcus's fate would ripple through the community, affecting those who had rallied to support him and those who had already cast judgment based on superficial narratives. Each day felt like a step deeper into a labyrinth that would ultimately challenge the very foundations of our legal system. The tension built as the closing arguments loomed. I squared my shoulders, steeling myself for the uphill battle that lay ahead. The prosecution would undoubtedly lean into their emotional appeal, but I trusted that the jurors, now acquainted with the full story, would discern the truth amidst the noise. It was my responsibility to ensure that they remained anchored in the evidence, rather than swept away by the current of biased rhetoric. In those moments, I reminded myself of the profound weight borne by this decision. The eyes of a community were upon us. The unseen threads of history and justice intertwined with every word spoken in that courtroom. In the end, would they rise to the occasion, or would fear and prejudice sway them? Only time would tell, but as the trial reached its crescendo, I remained steadfast in my quest for fairness, unwavering amid the storm of opinion swirling around us. During the first week of hearings, it became evident that not all members of the legal community shared my commitment to unbiased justice. One of the defense attorneys, a man with an ostensibly impeccable track record, would cast ambiguous looks my way when I reiterated rulings that he felt were unnecessarily strict. His raised voice, cloaked as passionate advocacy for his client, sometimes took on an undertone that hinted at deeper prejudices. On one occasion, during a recess in the proceedings, he uttered a comment to a colleague about how different times were when a judge's background didn't color the decisions. I could feel the weight of that comment, a reminder that our long overdue battle with racism was fought not only in the streets and in the press, but also within the hearts of those entrusted with upholding the law. As the days rolled into weeks, the tension in the courtroom thickened like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. While my resolve to remain impartial was steadfast, it became increasingly challenging as various outside influences began to seep into the judicial process. The press, with its incessant onslaught of headlines and opinions, positioned every ruling under a social microscope. Each judgment I issued felt like a shot fired in a battle over public perception rather than a commitment to justice. I would often retreat to my chambers, seeking solace in the records of past cases, landmarks of fairness and equity that had paved the path for a more just society. During one particularly heated session, I made a ruling that was met with instantaneous ire from the defense attorney. His response was a theatrical display of frustration, flinging papers and indignantly claiming that my decision disregarded the sanctity of his client's rights. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, and I could sense the weight of every pair of eyes trained on me, waiting to ascertain my next move. In that moment, I was not just a judge, I was a battleground for ideals clashing over the very foundation of justice. I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the knowledge that my role was bigger than any individual case. It was about establishing a precedent for fairness amidst an undercurrent of bias. In the quiet moments between proceedings, I often pondered the faces of those who sat in the gallery. Many were families who had been torn apart by the consequences of the legal outcomes being debated. I felt an obligation to them, a reminder that justice was not merely a concept, but a lifeline for individuals caught in the web of societal prejudice. The burden weighed heavily, entwining itself within every judgment I made. My commitment to making decisions based on the law, rather than the cacophony of outside opinion, became my guiding star, illuminating a path forward. As the hearings progressed, the atmosphere began to shift. Fellow judges, acutely aware of the climate, engaged in quiet discussions before the sessions began, some offering words of encouragement, while others expressed doubt about the system's ability to evolve. I learned to navigate their opinions, seeking allies within the chambers who shared my vision of a judiciary untethered from historical biases. Each small victory, an acknowledgement of the need for reform, the acceptance of diverse perspectives, felt like a step toward a more equitable system. However, the most profound change occurred not in the opinions exchanged in the courtroom, but in the shifting attitudes of the younger attorneys and interns who observed the proceedings. In their eyes, I noticed a flicker of hope. They wanted to be part of a legal landscape that prioritized justice for all. Their fearless engagement in dialogue, their questions about systemic change, and their passionate pursuit of a fairer future became the cadence to which I found myself responding. Perhaps the real revolution would not stem from the decisions made within the courtroom, but rather from those willing to challenge the status quo and reimagine what justice could truly look like. As I prepared for the next session, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The judge's gavel was not merely a tool for enforcing the law, it was an instrument of change, one that could resonate beyond the walls of the courtroom. A small yet significant thought echoed in my mind. Justice isn't just a destination. It's a journey we all must take together. With that understanding, I stepped into the courtroom ready to confront not just the case at hand, but the deeper truths that lay beneath the surface, ready to challenge biases, assumptions, and the very fabric of the legal system itself. As the trial advanced, the evidence presented painted a complex picture of Marcus Reed's involvement in the alleged criminal enterprise. Witness testimonies were at times contradictory, and forensic evidence was subjected to rigorous debate. There were moments in the courtroom when the tension had me acutely aware that I stood alone against an invisible tide of public sentiment. In those moments, the memories of past injustices, both personal and collective, pressed upon my spirit. Still, I focused on my duty, reminding myself that the man seated before me, accused of grievous wrongdoings, deserved the benefit of a fair trial, irrespective of the uproar that had surrounded him. During a particularly heated day of testimony, an expert witness for the prosecution took the stand with an air of arrogance that escalated the already tense atmosphere. His analysis of the forensic evidence was meticulous, yet there was an unmistakable hurry in his tone whenever he alluded to the logical association between race and criminal behavior. I interjected several times, reminding him of the necessity to stick to verified facts, but the damage had been done. The subtle insinuations, although not overtly racist, left an indelible mark on the proceedings. I later scribbled notes in my private journal about the nature of implicit bias, an intellectual exercise that, on days like these, moved from abstract theory to painful reality. As the day progressed, the tension in the courtroom seemed to amplify, the air thick with unspoken judgments and lingering unease. The jurors, a composite of diverse backgrounds, exchanged furtive glances, their expressions betraying a mix of confusion and discomfort. It was clear that this expert's views were not just a mere articulation of evidence. They were weaving a narrative that could unknowingly influence their perceptions of the case. I watched as several jurors furrowed their brows, grappling with the implications of his testimony, and I wondered how many of them recognized the insidious nature of the biases creeping into their thoughts. The defense attorney took her time crafting her cross-examination, approaching the witness with an air of calculated calmness that was in stark contrast to the prosecution's aggression. She skillfully dissected his statements, prompting him to clarify his rationale and pushing him into uncomfortable territories where his assumptions were laid bare. Under her questioning, the veneer of professionalism began to crack, revealing a man who, perhaps unconsciously, had allowed his prejudices to color his interpretations. It was not merely a battle of wits. It was a stark reflection of deeper societal issues that plagued the justice system. During a brief recess, I stepped outside, seeking a moment of solitude to gather my thoughts. The sun blazed overhead, the heat still palpable, mirroring the intensity inside the courtroom. I couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. As a legal advocate, it was not just my job to defend the facts, but also to push against the tide of bias that threatened to tip the scales of justice. I pondered the stories of those whose lives had been irrevocably altered by decisions made under similar circumstances. Each case was a reminder that at the heart of this struggle were real people, with hopes, dreams, and families who depended on outcomes that often hinged on interpretations rife with prejudice. Returning to the courtroom, I noticed the demeanor of the jury had shifted slightly. Their initial discomfort now mingled with a determination to question the narratives being presented to them. Perhaps the defense's approach had taken root. I sat back, prepared to witness the dance of rhetoric and reason unfold, hoping that in the end, logic and humanity would prevail over static myths. The remainder of the trial proceeded with a renewed vigor. The discussion sharpened, the testimonies intensified. I felt a glimmer of hope as the day's discussions acknowledged the complex interplay of race, identity, and justice. By the time the day came to a close, I knew the fight was far from over. But in that moment, it felt as if a small victory had been claimed in the never-ending struggle for equity. I was repeatedly torn between the solemnity of my responsibilities as a judge and the personal sentiments that surged within me. Every time I closed my eyes at night, I recalled moments when the defamation of my identity as a judge of color became part of the narrative, a narrative that sought to undermine the very institutions I had vowed to serve. The isolation was at times overwhelming. My resolve was tested when members of the press, in their bid for sensational coverage, misquoted or misrepresented my rulings, framing them as evidence of bias. The headlines were relentless. Judges Heritage Cloud's judgment, or is justice for all a myth in our courtrooms? These charges, although baseless, stung like venom, making me wonder how many among my peers had begun to see me less as a guardian of the law and more as a product of political correctness. As I sat on the bench, every case brought to me felt like a test not only of legal knowledge, but of my very identity. I could sense the scrutiny of the gallery. Each gaze weighed down on me as if they could read my thoughts. The stakes seemed higher, and with each verdict, I felt the collective breath of a community holding on to hope that I would not falter. It was a heavy mantle to bear, especially when deep-seated prejudices often overshadowed merit. I strived to rise above the noise, to remind myself that justice was about impartiality and that the truth often resided in the shadows, requiring illumination rather than prejudice. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing court session, the chorus of misrepresentation around me grew louder. I found solace in books, immersing myself in the founding principles of justice, yet the sanctuary I sought was frequently disrupted by the loud clamor of social media, where opinions often drowned out factual recounts of my decisions. I began to reach out to my colleagues, anxious to find a network of support, a shared understanding that would reaffirm my belief in the integrity of our legal system. Through these conversations, I discovered I was not alone. Others had faced similar challenges. We formed a coalition, advocating not only for our credibility, but also for broader discussions on race, justice, and the nuances that shape our perceptions as judges. In our meetings, we shared experiences that highlighted not just the obstacles, but also the victories, cases that had transformed lives, sensitive dissenting opinions that had sparked dialogue, and initiatives that sought to bring justice into the community rather than away from it. We recognized the power we held, not merely as individuals cloaked in robes, but as voices for a more inclusive and equitable judiciary. Our efforts bore fruit. Slowly, we managed to sway public opinion through seminars and outreach programs focused on transparency and accountability. The more the community engaged with the judicial process, the clearer the understanding grew that justice could manifest in myriad forms, none of which relied solely on the skin tones of those who wore the robes. National forums elevated our discussions, bringing attention to the complexities of bias, social, systemic, and personal. In this journey, I began to reshape the narrative surrounding my identity. Instead of viewing it as a hindrance, I embraced it as a driving force for change. I delivered public addresses, sharing my story, and advocating for the importance of diversity within the judiciary. I saw the shift taking place. More young people of color began expressing interest in law, inspired by the representation they could see in figures like me. Each act of courage, however small, felt like a step toward mending the fractures within our justice system. The fight was ongoing, but as I closed my eyes each night, I no longer felt the sting of doubt. I felt empowerment instead, a resolve born from recognition of the struggles faced and the battles won. My ruling might continue to invite scrutiny, but I was determined to uphold not only the law, but also a legacy that future judges, especially those of color, could look upon with pride. Yes, the shadows lingered, but they served as reminders of the light we could ultimately create together. Yet every day I reminded myself of the oath I had taken, to serve justice impartially. I began to foster a quiet determination, a commitment to let my decisions be a testament to fairness, regardless of the prejudices that circled like vultures outside the courthouse walls. I took extra care in phrasing my rulings, ensuring that my language could not be misconstrued by those eager to distort the truth. Every sentencing remark, every dismissal of irrelevant evidence, was painstakingly chosen not just for legal precision, but also as a counter to the myriad voices that sought to diminish the legitimacy of my office. As I settled into my routine, navigating the complexities of the law, I found solace in the small acts of kindness that often went unnoticed. A nod of gratitude from a victim's family, or the quiet appreciation of a defendant who finally saw a glimpse of hope, became my fuel. These moments reminded me of the profound impact my choices had, not just within the confines of the courtroom, but in the lives intertwined with the justice system. I understood that my role extended beyond mere adjudication. I was a guardian of faith, faith in justice, in the process, and in the possibility of redemption. In my pursuit of fairness, I often sought the counsel of those whose wisdom transcended the textbook laws. My weekly discussions with seasoned lawyers and former judges transformed into informal seminars, where we would dissect cases, constantly searching for insights that challenged our preconceptions. One evening, as we debated the nuances of intent and motive, a thought crystallized within me. Justice was not just about correctness, it was also about humanity. It was about understanding the broader context, a society grappling with its own flaws while striving toward higher ideals. This realization propelled me to advocate for reform in areas I saw needing attention. I began working closely with local community organizations to bridge the gap between the people and the justice system they often viewed with skepticism. We organized workshops aimed at demystifying court procedures, empowering citizens with knowledge, and instilling a sense of ownership over the justice system. I wanted my courtroom to reflect the community it served, a place where every individual felt represented and heard, regardless of their background. However, my path was not without obstacles. With each decision I made, the specter of backlash loomed ever larger. Critics were quick to brand me as lenient or overly empathetic, their words sharp enough to pierce through the armor of resolve I meticulously crafted. Yet, as the old saying goes, the road to justice is always under construction. I learned that resilience was essential in the face of opposition. I sharpened my focus, not allowing detractors to sway my commitment to uphold the tenets of law and equity. As time went on, I found my convictions echoed in the attitudes of younger associates, eager to embrace the ethos of impartiality and integrity. Their fervor reignited my belief that change was possible, not just within the walls of the courthouse, but throughout the entire judicial process. I made it my mission to mentor them, guiding each as they navigated their early careers, emphasizing the importance of compassion in law. It was my way of nurturing a legacy, one that would carry forward the principles of fairness into a future where justice might finally be seen not just as an ideal, but as a lived reality. So, With each passing day, I continued my fight, knowing that true justice demanded vigilance, a dedication to understanding not just the law, but the heart of humanity. After all, it was not just about rendering a verdict. It was about shaping a society that could trust its guardians, standing firm against the shadows that threatened to cloud the very essence of justice itself. As the trial drew into its critical stages, closing arguments were scheduled. The defense, in a final appeal to reason and emotion, implored the jury to remember that Marcus Reed was a man shaped by a society that had often failed him. They painted a picture of systemic oppression and neglect, inviting the jury to view his alleged crimes in a wider context, a context that acknowledged the scars of racial injustice. I listened to their imploration with a heavy heart, fully aware of the fine line between a genuine cry for understanding and a manipulation of sympathy. My mind recalled similar arguments in past cases and the importance of drawing a clear distinction between empathy for hardship and condoning criminality. In the recesses of my thoughts, I often questioned, where did the line between fair judgment and personal sentiment lie? For me, the answer was simple. It was in the steadfast adherence to reason and the incorruptible pursuit of truth. My inner dialogues, though cloaked in silence during court sessions, were a battleground where the ideals of justice fought against the ever-present specter of prejudice. I felt a responsibility not only to Marcus Reed, no matter his guilt or innocence, but to every individual who would come before my bench in the future. A future where the law must stand as an unyielding bulwark against the tides of bias. As I observed the faces in the courtroom, I could see the weight of expectation resting heavily on each one. The prosecution's arguments, though compelling, danced dangerously close to emotional manipulation, and I felt my pulse quicken with the need to maintain balance. Each piece of evidence needed to be scrutinized, not only for its relevance but for its presentation. Was it crafted to elicit sympathy, or was it rooted in fact? The defense, equally impassioned, sought to weave a narrative that painted Marcus as a victim of circumstance, yet I reminded myself that emotions, however stirring, could cloud judgment. As I sifted through the testimonies and the conflicting accounts, my mind returned to the foundational principles of law that I had studied with fervor in my early years. The legal texts, the philosophies of past jurists, and the enduring question of morality in the face of law, these were my compass. In moments of doubt, I would recall the words of those who had fought for justice long before me, each case building upon the last, each decision a forward march into a future only partially illuminated by the past. I found myself yearning for a time when fairness had not been drowned in the undertow of public opinion, where a judge was less a figure within an arena of spectators and more a steward of the law. The complexities of each case, like threads in a tapestry, should be inspected with scrutiny for the greater narrative they contributed to. I shuddered at the thought of a decision swayed by societal pressures, the potential damage it could wreak on the very fabric of our judicial system. This thought urged me to embrace a broader vision of justice, one that extended beyond the confines of the courtroom. With each passing day, I became increasingly aware that my duty was to safeguard the integrity of not just the scales of justice, but the very ideals of equality and fairness. It was a lesson in humility to recognize that the law was not merely a code of rules, but a living testament to the struggles of humanity. I envisioned a courtroom where every individual, regardless of background or circumstance, could stand and feel assured that they would be heard, that they would be treated with dignity. The whispers of my conscience urged me to cultivate that environment, to transcend biases not only for the sake of the current trial, but for the countless cases yet to come. In time, I realized that my pursuit of reason and truth would not be an isolated endeavor. It required the collective will of all who participated in the justice system. Lawyers, jurors, and yes, even the audience that often thrummed with anticipation. My role was not to be the infallible arbiter, but rather a facilitator of open discourse, a protector of the principles that govern our shared existence. The journey ahead was fraught with challenges, but it was a path worth forging, one where each decision could ripple across time, touching lives in ways I could only begin to imagine. Outside the courtroom, the backlash was equally intense. I received messages from colleagues, some of supportive, sympathetic nature, and others laced with thinly veiled criticism. A fellow judge, in an offhand conversation at a legal conference, remarked that perhaps our legal systems are not yet ready for the kind of justice that insists on looking beyond skin color. Such remarks, though not made in the presence of the public, echoed in my mind long after they were spoken. I found myself scrutinizing each social interaction, each professional courtesy, wondering if my instructions, my demeanor, my very presence was being parsed for evidence of bias or incompetence. One afternoon, while reviewing case files in my chambers, I was unexpectedly visited by a young law clerk whose bright eyes belied both admiration and anxiety. She hesitated before speaking, her voice trembling as she asked, "Your Honor, do you ever fear that your decisions might be interpreted through the lens of your own identity?" I paused, considering the weight of her question. In that moment, I realized that my struggle was no longer confined to my own sense of duty. It had become a beacon for others who might one day follow in my footsteps. I reassured her in a measured tone that my commitment was to the law, to every person who would seek its solace, regardless of the color of their skin or the opinions of the world beyond these hallowed halls. The trial's turning point came during the pivotal summation, where I was required to instruct the jury on the boundaries of reason, the meaning of impartiality, and the legal standards that must guide their decision-making. My instructions, carefully crafted and delivered with unwavering authority, were interspersed with reminders that justice required not just an understanding of the law, but also an ability to see past stereotypes. I spoke of the dangers of letting prejudice infiltrate even the most sacred of civic institutions, and I urged the jurors to remain as unbiased as the scales of justice themselves. As I scanned the faces of the jury, I could see a mixture of determination and uncertainty reflected in their expressions. This was not merely a matter of law. It was a moral undertaking that would ripple through the lives of those involved long after the verdict was announced. I continued with fervor, emphasizing that justice was not just a set of legal doctrines, but a profound ethical obligation that demanded they engage with the evidence presented, weighing it against their own experiences and biases. With each passing word, I drew their attention to the testimonies, the accounts of pain, resilience, and truth that had unfolded within the courtroom walls. I reminded them of the poignant moments when the witnesses broke down, their voices shaking under the weight of their narratives. It was critical for them to understand that these were not just stories. They were lives intertwined in a complex tapestry of cause and effect, shaped by choices and consequences. As I approached the conclusion of my summation, I invoked the legacy of those who had fought for equal justice, mentioning historic cases that had reshaped our understanding of fairness. I urged the jury to think of themselves not just as adjudicators of guilt or innocence, but as stewards of societal values, guardians standing at the crossroads of empathy and judgment. My voice steadied as I underscored the gravity of their impending decision, knowing that each juror held the power to illuminate or darken the path toward justice. They were tasked with a profound responsibility to ensure that the verdict reflected not just a conclusion based on evidence, but a commitment to uphold the ideals that underpin our legal system. I stepped back, the courtroom silent save for the sound of pens on paper as they took notes, weighing my words against their own principles. As I exited the courtroom, the tension still crackling in the air, I felt an anxious hope clenching at my chest. The waiting was the hardest part, knowing that soon the jury would deliberate and their decision would echo through the community. Would they embrace the concept of true impartiality, or would the shadows of bias cloud their judgment? This moment, I realized, was not just about the case itself, but about the very essence of justice in an imperfect world. In the days that followed, as the jury deliberated behind closed doors, I found myself in a state of reflective solitude. I wandered long through the empty corridors of the courthouse, contemplating the nature of my role and the immense burden I bore, not merely as a keeper of legal precedent, but as a symbol of our collective aspiration for fairness. I recalled the faces of those who had come before me, each one carrying a story of triumph or tragedy, and understood that my decisions would now become a part of that legacy, forever interconnected with the hopes and doubts of a society grappling with its deep-seated prejudices. As I traced the worn linoleum floors of the building, I felt the weight of countless decisions echoing in my thoughts. Each case, like a thread, wove into the fabric of our judicial system, intertwining justice and human experience. I paused to peer into a courtroom, empty yet resonating with the memories of arguments and counter-arguments that had played out on its stage. A deep sigh escaped my lips, for I knew that justice was not merely a concept, but a living entity that breathed through the voices of the individuals it impacted. Outside, the sun began to set, casting long shadows that danced along the walls, mirroring the complexities of the situation I found myself embroiled in. The flickering lights of the city gradually began to glow like stars emerging in the twilight, each one representing a promise of hope, yet also a reminder of the uncertainties that lay ahead. What if the jury's decision swayed awry? What if the misunderstood narratives of the innocent were lost in the complicated web of rigid legal frameworks? Resting against the cool surface of a granite pillar, I drew a deep breath, envisioning the lives woven into the stories shared over these procedural days, stories that demanded to be heard, not just documented. I recalled a brief moment in the trial when a witness had faltered, their voice trembling as they relayed their experience. The raw vulnerability in that moment had struck a chord within me, igniting an urgency to strive for a justice that comprehended pain and humanity. My thoughts drifted to the future, wondering how decisions made in these hallowed halls would resonate through the generations. Would they inspire change, or would they reinforce the status quo? More importantly, could I, in my role, contribute to a more enlightened understanding of justice that embraced empathy as a fundamental pillar? Perhaps that was the simple magic of the judicial process, how it offered people a stage to share their truths, challenge the norms, and, when necessary, defy the odds. The surrounding silence was a stark reminder of the weight of anticipation. As I prepared myself for the moments ahead, I reaffirmed my commitment to wield the gavel, not just with precision, but with compassion, recognizing that each verdict I may render would ripple far beyond the walls of the courtroom. The legacy of justice was not simply about the final decision, but about the journey there, a journey filled with the pulse of humanity, persistence, and above all, the pursuit of equity in what often felt like an uneven playing field. With each step I took, I began to forge my resolve anew, understanding that the true measure of justice would lie in its ability to uplift voices that had long been silenced. It was not just about the law, it was about the people, the fabric of society intertwined with the law, waiting for the scales of justice to find their balance. The verdict, when it finally emerged, was met with a mix of relief and renewed controversy. Marcus Reed was found guilty on several charges, but the sentencing was tempered by mitigating circumstances that acknowledged the social conditions which had contributed to his life of strife. In handing down the sentence, I recited the judgment with painstaking clarity, ensuring that every word underscored the principle that justice is, above all, impartial. I concluded with a remark that was both a legal pronouncement and a personal testament. May this judgment serve as a reminder that the law does not bend to prejudice, nor does it allow the imperfections of our society to dictate the measure of our humanity. Even as I spoke, I knew that the impact of my words would extend far beyond that courtroom, resonating in the hearts of those who dare to dream of a truly equitable society. The media reaction was swift and unyielding. Editorials lambasted my decision, some claiming that my rulings were a product of an agenda rather than objective jurisprudence. I received both praise and vitriol in equal measure. In interviews, I was repeatedly forced to defend not only the legal foundation of my decision, but my very identity as a judge of color. It was as though every question about the case was, at its core, a challenge to the legitimacy of my existence in that office. Yet I remained composed, answering each inquiry with a steadfast adherence to the facts and the law as I saw them. In private reflections, I questioned the very nature of progress. Despite decades of advancements in civil rights, it became increasingly clear that the legacy of prejudice was not so easily vanquished. Each step forward in our legal system was met by forces determined to anchor us to a past steeped in discrimination. I often recalled anecdotes from my early career, a time when I was mistaken for a clerk rather than a judge, or when a senior attorney's condescending remark underscored the assumption that I was out of place. Those memories, painful as they were, served as both a reminder and a motivator. They reminded me of the arduous journey we had all taken to reach a semblance of equality, and they motivated me to continue fighting, not only for justice in a single trial, but for justice in every facet of our society. Throughout the case, I found solace in the rare moments of human connection that transcended the rigidity of the courtroom's protocols. There were instances when seasoned attorneys, regardless of their personal biases, would exchange quiet nods of mutual respect, a tacit acknowledgement that, Beneath the layers of rhetoric and prejudice, a small group of us still believed in the possibility of a fair system. I recall one such moment when a veteran prosecutor, whose career had been built on the relentless pursuit of truth, whispered to me during a brief lull, "Your Honor, in this old dog's eyes, you remind me why we started on this path." Thank you. It was a fleeting instance of recognition, yet it resonated deeply, affirming that even among those who might disagree with my methods or my identity, there lay an understanding of the difficult balance we all had to maintain. In the weeks after the verdict, as the echoes of the trial faded into both public memory and legal archives, I found myself continuing a silent dialogue with the forces of history and progress. I attended community forums where citizens expressed both admiration for adherence to legal principles and dismay at the ongoing biases that permeated our social fabric. At one such forum, I was approached by a young activist who tearfully expressed gratitude for my role in the case. "You stood for us," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You proved that justice isn't reserved for one color or creed." Her words, simple yet profound, reaffirmed my belief in the slow and often painful progress toward true equality. Yet even as I received such expressions of support, I remained ever mindful of the subtle ways in which prejudice still infiltrated even the most structured aspects of our society. I continued to encounter biased remarks in closed-door meetings and in the margins of legal documents, remarks that insinuated that my decisions were merely reflections of a politically correct agenda. I realized that my struggle was not simply about one trial, nor was it about the fate of one individual. It was emblematic of a broader battle, one that pitted the enduring forces of tradition and discrimination against the evolving ideals of fairness and inclusivity. In the solitude of my chambers during long nights of reflection, I often revisited moments in the trial that rattled me the most. The emphasis on a criminal's background, his ethnicity, and the recurring moralistic judgments were not merely legal strategies. They were barbs aimed directly at my commitment to the law. I meticulously recorded these reflections, adding them to a growing compendium in my personal journal. A chronicle of my journey as a judge navigating a system that wrestles with its own identity, concurrently steadfast in tradition and eager for reform. As time passed, the case of Marcus Reed settled into the annals of legal history, yet its reverberations continued to influence my day-to-day duties. I began to see a slow but noticeable shift in the attitudes of my colleagues. In departmental meetings, discussions about racial bias transformed from hushed whispers into more direct inquiries about how we could reform practices that inadvertently perpetuated prejudice. There were new committees formed, new training sessions introduced, and a cautious optimism began to replace the resigned cynicism that had once pervaded our discussions about race and justice. One memorable instance occurred during an internal review of case management practices. I was invited to speak about my experiences and the lessons I had learned from the Marcus Reed trial. Standing before a diverse assembly of judges, attorneys, and administrative staff, I spoke candidly about the challenges of navigating public scrutiny and internal bias. I emphasized that while the law itself was colorblind, those who wielded it were undeniably human, subject to emotions, preconceptions, and the weight of societal expectations. I called for a renewed commitment to introspection and reform, urging everyone to consider the personal narratives behind every legal decision. That day, I sensed that my words resonated more deeply than I had anticipated, sparking a series of reforms aimed at minimizing the influence of bias in our courtrooms. The reforms were neither immediate nor all-encompassing, but they represented a fundamental shift in awareness, a recognition that every judge, regardless of background, carried an inherent responsibility to both the letter and spirit of the law. I continued to grapple with the reality that my personal identity, once seen as a barrier by some, could also be transformed into a bridge of understanding. Each time I delivered a ruling, I did so with the knowledge that I was not only interpreting statutes, but also challenging the historical narratives that had long served to marginalize those perceived as outsiders. Of course, there were still days when the weight of history seemed unbearably heavy. I encountered stillborn whispers in the corridors, snide remarks hidden beneath pleasantries, and a pervasive sense that my authenticity was an anomaly in a system designed for conformity. Yet every time I faced such challenges, I reminded myself why I had pursued this path in the first place: to ensure that justice, in its truest form, was not reserved for the few but a right extended to all. Marcus Reed's trial served to reinforce this resolve, crystallizing my belief that true reform could only come from within. It was only by confronting these prejudices head-on, in the face of both overt hostility and insidious bias, that we could begin to envision a system where the scales of justice were truly balanced. In the dwindling hours of that tumultuous chapter, I recognized that my journey had transcended one isolated case. I had become a quiet sentinel perched at the crossroads of history and progress, tasked with bearing witness to both the imperfections and the potential of our legal system. I saw in every case that came before me an echo of that day in the Marcus Reed trial, a reminder that the battle for fairness was ongoing, its front lines drawn not only in the halls of the courthouse, but in the hearts of every individual who believed in the promise of equality. Months later, as I prepared to deliver another sentencing in a different case, I paused to reflect on the profound impact that Marcus Reed's trial had on my life and career. I recalled the unspoken solidarity I had felt from some of my peers, the quiet conversations in the corridors that hinted at shared frustrations and hopes. I acknowledged that while scars remained, both visible and hidden, they were not marks of defeat but symbols of a larger struggle against injustice. In that moment, I vowed to continue my work with renewed dedication, understanding that every ruling, no matter how minor, contributed to a collective effort to reshape a system burdened by legacy and prejudice. In retrospect, I realized that the case was about much more than one man's alleged crimes. It was about challenging a status quo that had long operated beneath the veneer of legality. It forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities, to acknowledge that impartiality is a constant state of vigilance, rather than an innate quality. I had to learn that the law, when bound by human interpretation, could at times become entangled in the very prejudices it sought to eradicate. Yet even in those moments of doubt, I found strength in the knowledge that my duty was one of service, a service to all those whom the law was meant to protect, regardless of the color of their skin or the biases of those who watch from the sidelines. As I pen this reflection, I am acutely aware that the journey toward true justice is long and often fraught with obstacles, both external and internal. I continue to face criticism and to navigate the murky waters of public opinion, but I do so with the firm conviction that my role as a judge is a beacon of hope. My words, my decisions are not simply exercises in legal formalism. They are testaments to a vision of society where every individual stands equal before the law. In closing, I invite all who read these words, whether from the bench, the court, or the broader community, to consider the inherent responsibility we share in crafting a future free of prejudice. The case of Marcus Reed is etched in my memory as a turning point, a moment when the courtroom became not only a place of judgment, but a crucible for social change. Let it serve as a reminder that while the forces of tradition and bias may be formidable, they are not insurmountable. It is through unwavering commitment, introspection, and an unshakable belief in the goodness of our shared humanity that we can truly transform the course of justice. Every day as I don my robe and take my seat upon the bench, I carry with me the lessons learned from that trial and the enduring hope that one day future generations will look back upon these proceedings as a testament to a legal system capable of rising above the shadows of bias. Until that day arrives, I remain ever vigilant, ever determined, and ever mindful of the delicate balance between the authority of the law and the enduring spirit of fairness. For in the halls of justice, the measure of our humanity is revealed not in isolated victories, but in the persistent effort to ensure that every voice, regardless of its origin, is heard and respected. This story is not solely mine. It belongs to everyone who has fought for equality and dignity in every courtroom and every community across our vast and diverse nation. The struggle against discrimination is ongoing, and while each trial may carry its own burdens, it must also inspire us to reach ever higher in our quest for an impartial and just society. I stand today, not only as a judge but as a fellow citizen, committed to the belief that justice may be delayed, perhaps even challenged, but it must never be denied. Let this be a call to all who seek to bring about change. Remain steadfast, remain courageous, and never allow prejudice to silence the voice of justice. In the continuing narrative of our times, every verdict, every ruling, and every deliberate word spoken in the service of the law contributes to a mosaic of progress, a mosaic that we, together, must strive to perfect. May my journey as a judge of color, fraught with both external challenges and internal triumphs, serve as an enduring reminder that within each of us lies the potential to redefine the contours of justice. And so, as the courtroom doors close behind me each day, I step out into the world with a steadfast commitment to be both guardian and advocate of a future where justice is truly blind, where equality is not just an ideal, but a lived, everyday reality. In pursuit of this dream, I often reflect on the stories and struggles of those who came before me, trailblazers who shattered the glass ceilings of their eras. Their legacies serve as both inspiration and compass, guiding my footsteps as I navigate the complexities of a justice system that can often feel impenetrable. With every case that crosses my desk, I imagine the weight of history resting upon my shoulders, urging me to act not just as a judge, but as a steward of hope. Walking the tightrope of impartiality while carrying the mantle of my identity is no small feat. There are days when the world feels heavy with its injustices, when the echoes of systemic failures resonate in the chambers of my mind. Yet in those moments of doubt, I draw strength from the vibrant communities I serve, communities that have long been the backbone of resilience and advocacy. Their stories pulse through the veins of my decisions, reminding me that the law is not merely a collection of statutes, but a living entity that must evolve and adapt to the needs of all people. As I engage with young minds through mentorship programs, sharing the trials and triumphs of my own path, I am filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Each interaction is a chance to plant seeds of change, to inspire the next generation to take up the mantle of justice, to question the status quo, and to aspire to a future where every voice is heard. It is within this cycle of giving back, of nurturing future leaders, that I find the antidote to despair. And so, as I continue to tread this intricate tapestry of law and humanity, I hold close the belief that progress is a collective endeavor. It is not solely my responsibility, it belongs to us all. Every attorney, every advocate, and every citizen has a role to play in this symphony of justice. United, we can forge alliances that transcend race, class, and creed, building a legal landscape where everyone feels valued and empowered. Together, we must challenge biases, dismantle barriers, and bring forth the light of understanding into the darkest corners of the legal system. In this spirit, I carry my mission forward, ready to confront the wind of adversity with an unwavering spirit. Because at the end of the day, the true measure of justice lies not in the starkness of law books, but in the humanity that surrounds them. Each ruling is a stroke within a grand painting, and I am both painter and canvas, dedicated to crafting a masterpiece that reflects the diverse and intricate beauty of our shared existence. Reflecting on the legacy of the Marcus Reed trial, I understand that the true measure of justice is not found solely in the decrees of a single judge, but in the collective will to challenge prejudices, reform systems, and elevate every citizen to the status of an equal before the law. Even if my decisions sometimes provoke controversy and even hostility, I remain resolute in my duty to uphold the principles that have defined our legal system since time immemorial. For the law, in its purest form, is a call to humanity, a call to see beyond superficial differences and to engage in the noble pursuit of truth and fairness. Thus, every case I preside over, every deliberation I lead, becomes an opportunity to honor the promise of justice that has been entrusted to me. Let the trials and tribulations of our times be a beacon, guiding us toward a future where judgments are rendered solely on the merit of evidence and the unyielding pursuit of truth. In that future, no individual, whether a defendant, a lawyer, or a judge, will be defined by the shade of their skin, but by the integrity of their actions and the principles they hold dear. In this narrative of struggle, reflection, and eventual progress, I find not only the challenges that once divided us, but also the unifying threads that bind us together in the quest for a more just and inclusive society. I am reminded every day that while the work is far from complete, each effort to combat prejudice and uphold the values of fairness brings us one step closer to a true and lasting justice, a justice that will one day shine with the brilliance of equality for all. Now, as I close this chapter of my reflections, I stand with a quiet, unwavering determination to continue my service, confident that through the relentless pursuit of truth and fairness, we will eventually dismantle the barriers of discrimination that have long undermined our communal conscience. My hope is that my actions, my decisions, and the very essence of my judicial service will inspire future generations to carry this mantle forward, transforming our legal system into one that truly exemplifies the cherished principles upon which our nation was founded. In the final analysis, the Marcus Reed trial has been both a crucible and a catalyst, a painful reminder that while the scars of the past may never fully fade, they can indeed forge the tools of change. It is my solemn responsibility to ensure that every case before me becomes an opportunity to affirm that justice is not a privilege of the few, but the birthright of every person, irrespective of race, creed, or background. And in doing so, I strive to contribute, however modestly, to the great endeavor of transforming our society into a realm where prejudice is banished and the dignity of every individual is recognized and celebrated. As I take my leave from this reflection, I carry with me the enduring lesson that our commitment to justice must be as unyielding as the law itself, a commitment that must persist even in the face of relentless challenges, public scrutiny, and the burdens of history. For in our collective actions lies the power to effect real, meaningful change, and it is a power that, though hard-won, must be guarded fiercely and wielded with an unwavering sense of duty. May this account serve not only as a record of one trial, but also as a testament to the ongoing journey toward a just society, a society where the color of one's skin is no longer a lens through which their worth is judged, but a vibrant hue in the grand tapestry of our shared human experience. In that future, the halls of justice will resound with the voices of every citizen, united in the unbreakable belief that true equality is not merely an aspiration, but the very foundation of our civilization. So, I remain here, on this bench of responsibility, with a full knowledge that every decision I make has the potential to shape the future. With a heart both heavy and hopeful, I continue to render judgments not with the burdens of prejudice, but with a clear-eyed commitment to fairness, integrity, and the universal pursuit of truth. I invite all who encounter these words to join me in this never-ending quest, to listen, to act, and to believe in a system of justice that honors the dignity of every human soul. This is my story, the story of a judge of color facing the persistent challenges of bias, the tumult of public opinion, and the enduring hope for a day when every corner of our legal system will shine with the light of true equality. And though the road is long and fraught with obstacles, I remain confident that together we will one day reach a time when justice is not an abstract promise, but a living reality that embraces every member of our society with fairness and respect.